First, I just want to say thank you to Charlotte for putting together this amazing show. Kind of unbelievably next level art too. For those of you who have seen it, you know how amazing the whole experience is, and hopefully everyone will get a chance to look at it this weekend. So I usually, when I do readings, I read something that I've written, but I decided to do something different and more intimidating. I thought talking publicly for the first time since COVID wasn't scary enough. Why not make it more complicated for myself? So instead, I'm just going to share some funky ideas that I've been having recently. Part of them have been inspired by the work that this show is inspired by, and some of them have just been coming to me by virtue of living a life. So Charlotte asked me if I would write something about the painting, the Thomas Cole painting, and its relationship to the idea of having a show in the swamp. And I immediately started procrastinating, and instead of sitting down and working on it, I decided to go shopping. And I wanted to go shoe shopping. So I went to a vintage store and I went looking for shoes. And if you are like me and you have, you know, average size shoes for a woman, so size 9 is average for a woman, you might have experienced that when you go to a vintage store, you can't find any shoes that fit you. They're all like size 4, size 5, especially if you want something from like the 60s or 70s. They're all so tiny. And so I was shopping looking for shoes, just like the shoes that were cute were too small and the shoes that fit me were ugly. And I was like, God, I am such an oaf. And women back in the day were so dainty. And I had this whole idea, like, what's wrong with me? I'm this 21st century stomping around monster, and I'll never be like the beautiful little women of the past. I didn't buy any shoes. And I went home and I was thinking about that. And then just, it dawned on me that that doesn't make any sense, because those shoes were from like less than 100 years ago. And how could it be possible that foot sizes have changed that much in what, like 50, 100 years? So I looked it up, and it turns out that shoe sizes have changed. The average shoe size has changed about one size in the past 3 generations. So where it's now a size 9 in the 1960s, it would have been like a size 8. So why don't they have cute shoes from the 60s in my size? Okay, maybe you figured it out. The reason is because all the cute shoes from the 60s were purchased by people in the 60s and worn out. And all the cute shoes that exist now from that time were too small then for the average size. They were the more unusual sizes. And the ones that are in my size, no one wanted to buy back then. So that sort of blew my mind, because it means that I was looking at artifacts from history and thinking that I understood the past because of the artifacts that were available to me, but I was actually creating a total fantasy of the past, right? I saw small shoes from the past equals people were smaller back then. It's actually small shoes from the past because that's what's left, right? That's what's dead stock. So that means that the best preserved artifacts from the past are those that were less useful, and the things that were used the most are the least well preserved. Okay, so that I thought was kind of cool. And it reminded me of a piece of local history from about 15 years ago. So in 2007, Turner's Falls, which is a town about 20 minutes north on the river, they got a $5 million grant to expand their municipal airport. They got it from the Federal Aviation Administration. And so before they could expand their airport, they had to do their due diligence and bring in some archaeologists, because a local guy had found some arrowheads, some jasper arrowheads on the site of the airport. So they brought in the archaeologists to see if there was anything worth saving there. And they started by excavating the southern side of the runway, where they had found the arrowheads. So there they found evidence of encampments, so arrowheads and, fire pits and shards of, broken rocks that had been chiseled and tools. They found those evidence from 12,000, 9,000, and 2,000 years ago, all on the southern side of the runway. So the archaeologists said, you can't develop here until we've completely, excavated the land and interpreted the land. Then the archaeologists went to the north side of the runway, which was this hill, like a wooded hill covered in forest, and they started digging in the same depths as they had found the other encampments, and they didn't find anything. Not in the 12,000 year level, not in the 9,000, not in the 2,000, not even the smallest shard. So the archaeologist's interpretation was, 100 feet over there was history, it was important to the Pocumtuck Confederacy, the native people who have been here, and here, 100 feet away, was never used. It was never important, so here's where you should develop the airport. And that was totally accepted by the FAA. But the town decided to bring in a representative from a local tribe, from the Narragansett tribe, a man named Doug Harris. And he looked at the southern side of the encampments and he said, yes, obviously there were people here in 3 very significant different times in history. And then he went to the hill where no one had ever been, and he stopped and he said, I know this to be a sacred ceremonial hill. And the reason why there is no stuff here is because it was cleaned away by the people who had come here. They would camp on the southern side, and that's where they would leave their camp garbage, and they would make sure to clean up the sacred site. So yes, there's archaeological evidence on the other side, but really that's not the important site. And the important site is the empty hill. So 2 very different examples, but with the same idea, right? That the artifacts of history kind of lead us astray when we think about them traditionally. We think artifacts means the history, and we forget about the magic of the invisible and the magic of what's not present. So that was on my mind when I started looking at the painting. So if we can share, we have some examples of the painting. So this painting, it's by Thomas Cole. It's called View from Mount Holyoke, Northampton, Massachusetts, After a Thunderstorm, aka the Oxbow, where we are. And it was painted in 1836. So Thomas Cole was the father of the Hudson River School. He was known for bringing Romanticism to North America. And Romanticism was an artistic movement that was sort of like a rejection of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment saying that there is one material truth to this universe, and the human experience gets in the way of us knowing that truth. And so what we can do is triangulate the real truth using the scientific method and testing things, and make sure that, the personalities and the desires and the feelings of the individual human, we get rid of all that and we're just left with the truth. And so this led to the Industrial Revolution. It led to great advancements in science and industry and hygiene and medicine, et cetera, et cetera. Life was, so much better for all these reasons. And at the same time, people were more alienated than ever. Maybe this is something you can relate to living now, right? Life is supposed to be so good, and yet it is so empty and filled with the void. Maybe that's just me. So the Romantics said, the Romantics asked why? Why are we so alienated? And their answer was that it's because what's important about the human experience, spirituality, cannot be found in the scientific method. You can't test the spirit. You can't test emotions. And so in order to show their ideology, they created a visual lexicon where they showed the sublime. And so in order to imbue things with human emotions like fear, love, glory, they used the language of nature. So if you look at the painting, which is like the organizing object for the show, you can see on the left, we have the Mount Holyoke summit, and we have, chaotic, dangerous wilderness. We have broken trees, we have a storm, and all these things are scary and bad. And on the right side, we have the beautiful oxbow. It is in daylight, and it's been cultivated almost grid-like, right? It's turned into farm plots. It just looks so beautiful. And these paintings, when Thomas Cole brought Romanticism to North America, it mutated into Manifest Destiny. Basically, the cultivated land is good, and we should do that. And the wild nature is horrible and dangerous. Okay. So, also in this painting, you can see, if you get to look at it closely, there's Thomas Cole on the bottom. He's painting the painting. The Romantics were also very obsessed with the genius artist and themselves. And here we have an umbrella on the bottom, which is closed, which means the storm has passed. So the dangerous wilderness is in the past, and the future is bright and orderly and cultivated. Okay, so I was looking at this, I was thinking about my new little theory about artifacts, which I'm calling the Disappearance Theory of History, because that makes it sound legit. And I was like, how does that apply to this painting, you know? And I started doing research, and I actually went to the Summit House, which Charlotte's leading a walk there tomorrow on the summit of Mount Holyoke. And at the Summit House, this guy gave a talk about the painting. And he pointed out that at the top of the painting, or the top of the landscape in the painting, there's actually an area that's been logged. And the shape of the logging leaves Hebrew letters. And the Hebrew letters spell out Shaddai, or the Almighty. And upside down, if you look at it from God's view, the logged letters spells out Noah, as in Noah's Ark. Crazy. So this, unfortunately, was not noticed during Thomas Cole's lifetime. And he didn't leave any writing about it. He didn't leave any letters. This was not like a trope that he normally did in his paintings. He did not often leave sort of mysterious Hebrew letters in his paintings. And so accordingly, a huge part of the meaning of this painting is lost on us. To me, this seems like maybe the most important part of the painting, that smack dab in the middle, there's like Hebrew letters saying the Almighty. No one knows what it means. So again, the most important thing, which is the spirit, is evasive, and we're left with what seems to be the material of the painting. And, you know, maybe one day we'll uncover what that means, but I just thought that was kind of a nice little connection. Another way to use my idea is to think about this painting as an artifact from the time and place that it was painted in. So 1830s, this is a painting of this landscape in the 1830s. One would maybe think that this is what the landscape looked like in the 1830s, and that is not true actually at all. I also learned this at the Summit House, that when Thomas Cole painted this painting allegedly from the Mount Holyoke summit, it was actually more developed then than it is now, and there were 2 beer halls right next to where he portrays himself as standing. So while he was, sketching this painting, he was surrounded by drunk people. And now there's actually only the beautiful Summit House, and there's no fun bars on the top of the mountain. So that would be pretty awesome. And similarly, where we see like this beautiful pastoral land that has no real buildings on it, this is 1836. Northampton was settled in the 1600s. It had been around for 200 years. So similarly, if we look at this painting as an artifact of the time, just like if I look at the small little shoes as an artifact of the 1960s and think that women only had tiny little feet back then, if I look at this, I might think that that's what the land looked like in the 1830s, and I'm totally led astray. Okay, so those are my little thoughts about the painting. I have a few more things that I want to say, if I still have anyone's interest. We're in the swamp, right? So the swamp was the oxbow. So where, as Charlotte mentioned in her very beautiful words before me, she said that the oxbow, which used to be connected to the Connecticut River in the 1830s, has since been disconnected. And that's because that's what oxbows do. So when a river is developing, it goes down and it'll go around, uneven part of the land. but the river wants to go straight. It wants to be economical. It wants to be lazy, essentially. And so over time, it'll work its way and disconnect the oxbow. And sometimes the oxbow will disappear. In our case, in the Connecticut River Valley, our oxbow has stayed and it's turned into a swamp. And the reason why it's turned into a swamp is because it's not useful for anything, right? You can't boat on it. You can't really develop it. It's disconnected. It's a useless artifact from time. And the oxbow itself, now as a swamp, was a useless artifact of the river itself. So that's why it's left to us to do what we want with it, because no one thinks they can make any money off of it. Very luckily for us, that's true, because we can have an amazing show like this. But I think it's important to note that just because this looks like nature doesn't mean that this is what the before of this area really was. This is actually what nature looks like in Western Mass after it's been developed, industrialized, and then deindustrialized. And the nature that's around us is mostly invasive species, like this beautiful changing yellow leaves is all poison ivy. So be careful of that. Yeah, so those are my little ideas that I've been having thanks to this show. If any of them inspired anyone, please talk to me, because, as I said, this is post-COVID and I'm very eager to talk to people. So hopefully you had some cool ideas. If I can share one last little cool epilogue about the Turners Falls Airport site. It's that the FAA ignored the words of Doug Harris and the Narragansett, and they clear-cut the northern holy ceremonial site because they decided that that's where they were going to develop. And when they did, they uncovered a sacred wall that had been laid down thousands of years ago. And the sacred wall went all the way across the site and had a little triangle of stones coming out of it. And because it had been clear-cut, Doug was able to stand on the hill and see for miles and miles. And he noticed that the little triangle pointed right into a notch in the Pocumtuck Range, 30 miles away. And that on August 11th of every year, which is the height of the Perseid meteor shower, that's where the sun sets. Exactly where the triangle points in that notch. And the Perseid meteor shower was believed by the Pocumtuck Confederacy and in general by northeastern tribes to be the time in the year when the spirits return to God's house. So Doug and some other representatives from the Narragansett and the Wampanoag actually went to that site where the arrow pointed, and there, it was on private land, this guy's backyard, they found standing stones that aligned with the sunset on the summer solstice. This was in 2008. And if you follow the line made by the Perseid meteor shower and the line made by the summer solstice in this area, within 25-mile radius, there are so far discovered 80 sites of astrological significance. So all that is to say that history is way more insanely gorgeous than we could ever imagine. And we shouldn't think that we can assume anything, and that sometimes the only way to understand the past is actually by progress that seems to be threatening, but can, in these amazing, beautiful ways, uncover these very special sites. So, thank you for listening. And thanks for coming.